What's up, guys? JD here, and on today's show, I am talking with Brian Curin, who is an entrepreneur extraordinaire. He's got that entrepreneur mojo, he's got the juju, he's bringing stories, and you guys are going to love it. So, check this out. Brian starts at the age of, I think he was 22, and he starts a convenience store cigar company importing cigars and selling them at convenience stores nationally. When he's 22, takes that company public. From there, has a wild, massive explosion, joins Cold Stone Creamery and takes that business from 4 stores to over 1,000 stores. And then by the time he's 30, or not even 30 yet, starts his own footwear company, does a restaurant thing, and now he's doing this thing called Little Kitchen Academy, which is a Montessori cooking school for kids. This guy is awesome. You guys are going to love these stories, the entrepreneur journey, and the lessons he learned along the way. We're going to get into the weeds, and I think you're really going to love it. If you're new here, my name's Jon Davids. I am the author of Marketing Superpowers, Build a Brand So Good that getting customers feels like magic. If you're watching on YouTube, here's the book. And of course, see that picture behind me? I got the cover blown up. It is now the poster that hangs over my shoulder. If you're listening to this on Spotify and Apple, make sure you leave a rating, review, share with your friends. Of course, on YouTube, leave a comment, like, I will reply. And of course, go to jondavids.com, grab the newsletter, grab a sample of the book, all that good stuff. Now let's get to my conversation with Brian Curin. Brian, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John. I appreciate it.
So you've had kind of a crazy entrepreneur career, and I want to go back and sort of get to the point where you are now with Little Kitchen Academy. But you started with a pretty big thing out of the gate, going public pretty early. I think when you were 23. So why don't you take
Yeah,
us back to that experience and that crazy journey?
yeah, it has been a crazy journey of entrepreneurship. And I actually started selling corn out of a cornfield when I was a kid, growing up in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. I wasn't a farmer, but wanted to make money to buy baseball cards and asked the farmer if I could have some of the corn and started selling it. So that was my first like taste of business and trying to make some money. And went to school in Chicago, moved out to the desert to Scottsdale, and was introduced to a group of guys that had an idea to start a cigar company. And that was really when cigars hadn't boomed yet. And we were at the Phoenix Open and we were just trying to figure out an idea of what we could do. And one of my buddies had distribution in all the convenience stores throughout the United States and Canada. He sold these little roses that were on the counters at the time. And he's like, I wish there was something else we could put on the counters. I actually, from a previous kind of life living in Guatemala and traveling around, met a lot of people in the cigar industry accidentally. And I was like, what about cigars? We're smoking them. They're light, they're easy. And we literally had this sort of, hiccup and said, let's do it. And we created cigar, it was called Premium Cigars International. It was the largest marketer of premium cigars in the US, Canada, Mexico. We had humidors on every counter of every single convenience store chain. We had partnerships with Marvin Shankin, Cigar Aficionado, Smoke Magazine. And as timing would have it, it was when Demi Moore graced the cover of Cigar Aficionado, and everyone all of a sudden went, "We need to be doing that," and that's what took off.
And how did you, I mean, were you making cigars, manufacturing, sourcing, promoting? Like what part of the chain were you in?
Yeah, we were distributors and marketers. So initially, we didn't make them. We started making our own and had our own private labels. But we were taking, the top premium hand rolled cigars out there that were normally in tobacconists. If you wanted a cigar and you wanted that knowledge, you had to be at the golf course. You had to go to a tobacco shop. You didn't have access to it. And our, thought was, well, everyone should enjoy a really fine cigar, and they shouldn't have to feel intimidated about it. So we brought that out to the masses through the convenience stores, the easiest, most convenient place to buy things. And we worked with Arturo Fuente, with Consolidated Cigar. We brought in every major brand you can imagine and brought these $20, cigars in some cases back in the 90s into a convenience store setting.
And was the idea of putting a humidor on the front counter a pretty big leap in terms of distribution?
That was massive because it didn't exist. It was literally, we looked at it as a real estate play. Where is the most valuable real estate in retail, period? C stores. You've got literally, it's measured by sales per square inch, not per square foot. Everything is measured on those metrics, and we had the ability because of my partner's distribution with Roses already that we could go in and take that real estate, but put something more profitable in there at the time, and we got it. And our first one was 7-Eleven, was with Southland Corporation. We literally flew down to Texas, got a meeting with the head buyer who was like 70 something at the time. Walked in there with, probably a little too much ego and this great cigar idea. And he kind of ate our lunch at first, but really warmed up and liked us. And he's like, if you guys can do what you say you can do, he's like, you're going to have all the convenience stores throughout America. And he's like, can you do this? We're like, yes. We walked out of there asking for a test in Florida for just 30 locations. We just wanted to test it and see if it worked. When we got back to Arizona, there was a fax on actual fax machine back in the day that came through, and it was PO to roll out our program in all 5,000 plus 7-Elevens across the United States. And
Was
we had
that
to,
before you got into one though?
before we even had one, and we had 30 days to actually do it. So we sat there in this little tiny office looking at each other, trying to figure out, can, can we even pull this off? And we had to. So we we drove down to Mexico and we found someone who could build our humidors for us quickly. Um, we started running around trying to figure out how are we going to distribute this product and get it in there. How do we get the cigars in our little tiny warehouse at the time? And we actually pulled it off, and that led to somewhat of a forced IPO because one of my partner's dads, who had experience in that part of the world, said, "You've got two choices. You go back to Southland Corp 7-Eleven and say we can't do it, or you raise a lot of money really quickly, and the only way to do it is you got this PO, go public." And at the time, Premium Cigars International, we were the fastest company in NASDAQ history at that time to go public.
Okay, this story is giving me vibes of like 5 Hour Energy meets War Dogs
Oh,
meets Microsoft. Because so you basically have this immense real estate play. So 5 Hour Energy figured out that the front counter cash out is like the great place to sell energy drinks.
right.
Microsoft, because it's like when they got the opportunity to create the software for IBM computers, and they just had that huge contract that took off. And then, have you ever seen the movie War Dogs
Oh yeah,
with
yeah,
Jonah Hill? So I see
yeah.
that
There
scene
was
of
a
them
little bit of
driving
that.
into, yeah, driving
we
into
we were
Afghanistan.
we were renting U-Hauls, driving, delivering, sleeping in the truck, delivering humidors with cigars in convenience stores, and trying not to get kicked out.
I was gonna say some cartel stops, like, hey, we're okay here. But anyhow, that's amazing. So you just so to get to the point here, before we get to the IPO, I'm just curious. Give us the unit economics of a cigar. You're selling a $20 cigar. What does it cost you to make that, source that, ship that?
Yeah, at the end of the day, we were running 70% margin on our product. And the beautiful thing, I mean, a cigar takes, on average, it's actually a beautiful art form, right? It's a living thing at one time, right? It's seed to, you have hundreds of hands touching a hand rolled premium cigar over years. It's got to be cured. It's hung, like all these things, pressed in boxes, delivered, packaged. Um, and even with all of that, because of where the cigars came from, which typically are from the Dominican, Mexico, and Nicaragua, obviously Cuba, which we had Cuban cigars in Canada because we could at the time, um, is the costs were really low, coming in. So our margins were really really high, and of course the reason we succeed is we didn't know what we couldn't do. We couldn't ask a lot of questions from anybody. We just had to get things done, and we just made it happen without knowing what kind of constraints we may or may not have in any part of that business as we built it. And I mean, you know, we were hiring people just out of prison in Arizona to run the warehouse. Um, you know, it was a crazy great time, and especially when you hit that
Suppliers in
heyday.
Mexico, labor out of prison, you just whatever you can do.
Whatever we could do to get the cigars we needed, to get them to the convenience stores and make sure they were, fresh. There were issues with making sure they stayed humidified and at the right temperatures and things like that that we had to create and invent along the way.
That's so cool. And so fast forward to the IPO here. You IPO'd. I'm not even sure what that takes. So like, isn't an IPO a pretty expensive, long, grueling process?
Yeah, it can be. I mean, a typical IPO can be, I mean, $1 million investment, and it takes months to, even a year or two, really, if you've got something to take public. And for us, again, we didn't know, so it didn't matter. We just listened to. No, we didn't, but we had an introduction to a securities company out of Arizona that said, we're going to take a big chunk of your company. So we we see where this is going. You don't need to put up the money. We're going to, but we're going to get this thing and IPO it. And we actually IPO'd it like five and a quarter on the exchange, and it was a big deal and such a blur too because it happened so quickly that we didn't really get to enjoy it because we were right back to who's going to drive a U-Haul, who's going to deliver this product. Cigars are going bad at that convenience store. I mean, it was insane.
And was there a moment where your net worth is like $50 million, or did it ever get to that point?
No, the highest we were at about a $25 million valuation as a company at our peak at that point in time.
Okay. And did you like at the end of the story here? Did you actually leave with a nice nest egg, or did that not really set
No,
you up for
we,
life?
we left with nothing.
You left with nothing. Okay,
We
so
left with
how did
nothing.
how did
Yeah.
you leave with nothing? How did the story end?
Yeah, so again, not knowing things, right? We were sort of like the darlings of the industry, and it was, even though the timing was great on the coincidence with Cigar Aficionado, the cigar boom happening, we were in the right place, right time with this amazing program, had the distribution locked and loaded. We were the one of the top FedEx accounts in the nation. 2 million cigars a month going through our warehouses. Like it was a beautiful thing. At the same time, that's when Joe Camel and all the cigarette companies were getting sued. And we went from being the darlings of the industry and all the old tobacco guys and people, loving us, wanting to hang out, loving what we were doing, to all of a sudden pointing the finger, trying to get the heat off of them, going, "Hey, we're getting sued, we're getting targeted as these, cigarette companies, but what about these cigar guys?" And all of a sudden it shifted towards us. So we started getting a lot of that heat on, how you're marketing. All the constraints were coming in on where you could market. And our humidor program went from the front of convenience stores, and we were in drugstores, we were at the club stores, we were in grocery stores too, to you have to lock the humidors now. So we all of a sudden the accessibility there was a barrier. And then it went from there to, oh, you can't have that space anymore. We have to move you to the back counter. And it was like, you want to talk about taking, this revenue stream, this company from literally, where it was to 50% almost overnight. And then we got a valuable lesson from the state of California with labeling laws. So Surgeon General warnings you have to have on all your packaging. We had it on all the humidors and it was proper. But what would happen is cigars would come into our warehouse in boxes with the label on it. We would break those, take the cigars individually, put them into the humidors so you could buy them individually. The label was on the humidor. It didn't go out the door with you on the actual cigar. And of course, as people aren't smart enough to figure out that they're bad for you without having that label right on there. We ended up getting a massive lawsuit from the state of California that we had to settle, and it was like, okay, survival mode. What else can we sell? Because we had distribution, so we were bringing in antenna balls, that were on cars back in the day, that you
Oh
would
yeah,
stick
of course.
on your antennas, and sunglass repair kits, and it was just anything that we thought we could sell because we had this
Because
relationships
you
and
had the
distribution.
counter space in the 7-Eleven. And so
Yeah,
did you actually figure that out or not really?
we figured it out for a little while, limped along, and then at one point it was just, you have to kind of know when to call it quits. And we ended up selling one of our products, which still is in existence today, which is called Prime Time. And we actually invented and created a individually wrapped little cigar. It's like the size of a cigarette inside an indestructible plastic container, and they were literally distributed out of toothpick dispensers. So like you get at a restaurant, it was the same exact thing, and we created the mold and everything, and you would go and you could buy one of these little flavored tiny cigars that you could throw in a tackle box, a toolbox in your car, and never have to worry about getting crushed or ruined. It was always fresh. And we ended up selling that business to another company, and they're still out there in the convenience stores.
So much of startup success is timing, and if you're a little bit late or a little bit early, you can really fail spectacularly, because if you're too late,
Yeah.
obviously you don't have a wedge to stand on, and if you're too early, you won't have the money to last long enough to survive. I wonder if you had launched this, because you got caught up sort of in, as you said, the lawsuits and the
Mhm.
regulatory change. If you had launched this like 2 years earlier, would it have worked?
We would have been too early. No, I think we actually would have been too early because I don't think we could have sustained it. I think the timing was so perfect, and to take a company from idea to IPO in, literally a total of like a 60-day period. Um, and and have these partnerships that no one else could get. We had Ari Lyondike, who's a, iconic Indy race car driver, was a partner and our brand ambassador, and that's when he won the Indy 500. So the universe aligned for us on all those aspects. But then, of course, those other things come into play too. And at the end of the day, it was a success because we literally created an industry that didn't exist before, and distribution that didn't exist before, which led to a lot of other things.
All right, so that's the cigar story.
Yeah,
Let's shift gears and talk about ice cream, because you are also the ice cream man and you had a lot of success
yeah.
there. So take us to Cold Stone Creamery.
Yeah, that one is something special. And still is today. That was right after the cigar, boom and everything. It was trying to figure out, should we create something else? What was that? I didn't want to be in the tobacco industry anymore. It was fun, especially in the 20s and living that life. But my girlfriend at the time, who was running restaurants, she's like, let's go grab a movie. And then, I want to take you to this ice cream store. Great, let's go get ice cream. Walked in, jaw to the floor, blown away, like mind blown on what was happening there. It's like there's this greeting, there's this energy, it's well lit. There's all these candies and mix-ins and things like that. And, they're like, what kind of ice cream do you want? And there's this Cold Stone, and they're mixing it in, right? And I'm like, what is happening? It's like walking into Willy Wonka's chocolate factory for a kid. And I'm just watching this process, and I get my ice cream, and I start talking to I found out who was the manager at the time, and I'm asking all these questions. And she finally went, she's like, well, we're headquartered just down the street, and we're thinking about, starting to franchise and expand the company. If you want more information, go look at the website. So
So it
we
was a
left.
single chain business, single location business at this point.
They had 4 or 5 at the time that were operating, and the original founders started it back in the 80s, and were ready to actually go bankrupt and get out of the business. And then Doug Ducey, who was one of the original founders, partners with them, the CEO, became the governor of Arizona. He was the one who walked in and said, no, there's something here, and then opened a few more. And that's when I again literally walked into one with my girlfriend at the time, and who's my wife now, too. And so I immediately went home, dial up internet, looked at the static website. I was like, this is insane. I made a phone call the next day, got Doug Ducey on the phone, and I just said, hey, this is Brian Curin. I don't know if you know who I am. You probably don't. And he goes, oh no. He goes, the cigar, cigar guy. I said, yeah, yeah. And he's like, yeah. I'm like, listen, I go, I just experienced Cold Stone Creamery. Why isn't this around the world? Why doesn't the world know about it? And he said, well, he goes, maybe we should talk about that. I go, well, whatever I can do, I'd love to be part of it. And he's like, well, let's have lunch next week. Um, Within 20 minutes, I got in my car. I drove to the headquarter office, hot, pulled into the parking lot, hot, right to the front door, jumped out of my car. And I've never seen Doug before, but he was walking out of the front door. And I literally went, hey, is Doug Ducey in there? And you could see he was startled. He was like, I think he left for the day. I'm like, oh. I'm like, all right. And he goes, why? I'm like, well, I just talked to him and I just wanted to drop off my, package for him. And he's like, Brian? I said, yeah. He goes, Doug Ducey. He goes, I thought we were going to have lunch next week. I'm like, we can. I said, but I couldn't wait. And I said, here's, it was an old VHS tape at the time too of like, interviews I've done, the things I've done, my resume, like everything paper. And he goes, let's have lunch tomorrow. I'm like, okay. And we had lunch and he's like, are you able to, introduce this to the world? I said, yeah. And he's like, what are you thinking? I told him and he goes, why don't you come in as, one of the original partners here on the company because we're just looking to build our executive team. We're looking to expand this. And he's like, come in and head up all the marketing and branding. And
How old are you at the time?
I did. I was 24 then.
Holy moly. Okay, so
Yeah,
you're 24 and you've
yeah,
effectively become the CMO of this four location, what will be 1,000 plus location ice
yeah,
cream shop. And
yeah.
so, how many locations? I want to get into the strategy in a second, but in your time there, how many locations did you end with by the time you left?
Yeah, we hit 1,000 open and in development globally by the time I left, and it was one of those where Doug. I mean, I cut my teeth at Cold Stone really, and it's what has led to all the other things I've done, and to where I am today too, because so much of what we did firsts in the industry. The way we operated, our team, everything has carried over and throughout, almost any company I've ever built or started
So, give me an
to
example
date.
of some first. What were some really innovative things that you guys did?
Yeah, I mean, well, the biggest thing like for Cold Stone Creamery is, from a marketing standpoint, what put us on the map was the idea that I had had, which was we've got this mixing concept and there's a lot of education around it, right? It's like, how do you compete in ice cream? It's like who's got the best flavor, who can do more. And there were other people doing mix-in concepts and things like that. We weren't the first. We were just the best, the loudest, and and dominated it when we started getting to it. So I had come up with the idea of taking chocolate-covered crickets and putting it in the ice cream. And as timing would have it, I formed a strategic partnership with Survivor, the TV series, which that was during the Australia season. So it was early days of Survivor when it was like the real deal. And we partnered with them and we ended up having chocolate covered eating cricket contests at all the Cold Stone creameries across the country. For the kids, we had gummy worms and Oreo cookies crushed in so they could, if they didn't want to eat real bugs, they didn't have to. And then, by doing this, we had buffs from Survivor, and we had a prize where the winner through this would end up getting a fully paid trip to go and visit the Australia Survivor camp and spend a night there, where the survivors actually did and everything. And we blew it up, and it's what landed us in Times Square with Al Roker on the Today Show eating chocolate covered crickets. And I'll never forget that phone call because I was dealing with a health issue at the time, and I couldn't make it to New York for this thing that I created. And Doug called me right after the interview, and well, you did it. The world knows who Cold Stone Creamery is now. Get ready. And it was a rocket ship from there for us.
Blew the roof off. And so, something like that. I mean, Survivor at the time, I guess I don't know if this was season one, two, three, four, but it was a big, big show back at that time. Was this like a bet the company budget type deal, or was this, if it had faded, it would have been okay?
No, this was if this doesn't work, I'm probably no longer part of Cold Stone Creamery, and not sure if Cold Stone Creamery would have, what would have happened. It would have just been another great ice cream concept, maybe that kind of muscled through it. So this was a getting the franchisees at the time, everybody on the team to buy in on it, to commit to it, living it, walking around with a buff and wearing it like every day, like this is what we're doing and we've got to make it successful mentality.
Let me ask you a question about. I had a guy named Greg Majewski on the show a couple weeks ago, and he's a franchise guy. Jimmy John's was the company he created. And I asked him a question. I'm going to ask you because I'm curious. He didn't have an answer. How do ice cream shops work in cold climates for 6, 7, 8 months a year, Chicago, New York? Are the margins just so good during the warm months and business is okay? But how do you survive those cold stretches?
It's a great question, actually. And so, first of all, ice cream usually is about a 90% margin. Ice cream is air. You have to remember, like, you're mixing air into this product. So, the majority of the product is actually air. And, 90% margins is a pretty good business.
That's software business right there.
It is, yeah. But the cold weather climates, actually, the two most highest consumption per capita ice cream consumers in North America are Alaska, Anchorage specifically, and then Utah, Salt Lake City, which is two reasons. One, cold weather climates and the science behind it is when you eat ice cream, actually, you heat up. Your body is starting to produce more calories, it needs to burn it more. So it actually keeps you warm. In Alaska, they know that. So when we opened Cold Stone in Alaska, and that was one of the first two, and it was someone who we kept saying no to. And we're like, you're insane, ice cream in Alaska, get out of our office. And he wouldn't leave. He actually wouldn't leave our office physically and said, worst case scenario, guys, if it works, you've got a story. You're selling ice cream to Eskimos, essentially, at the time, is what he said. He goes, if it doesn't work, no one cares. No one knows about it. What's the risk? We're like, okay, open them. 6 locations later, and some of our top producing locations, buckets of ice cream because you sell a lot of ice cream in the cold weather climates. In Utah, it was a bit different because there's you know alcohol, caffeine, so there's not a lot of vices, and ice cream was one of the biggest vices. So we ended up selling a ton of ice cream there, but that's the reason why ice cream does work very well in cold weather climates.
Very cool. And
Yeah.
so you're there for a while. Why did you leave, or what was the company doing when you left?
Yeah, we had during that period. I mean, I had, we were doing partnerships, and the ice cream sponsor for the Phoenix Coyotes NHL team, for the Colorado Avalanche, created recipes. The Coyotes Crunch was the official ice cream flavor. Did a lot of those types of partnerships, and just building, building, building. And then there was a moment where we were selling the rights to territories, so someone could come in and buy the rights to, like, all of Southern California. And they could then sub franchise, right? So they had their locations and then they had franchisees of theirs and were building their empire. And I was watching these guys, come into our conferences and meetings and, in their really nice cars and like living this life. And I'm saying, we are killing ourselves like 24/7 to build this company, this brand, and then have this opportunity. And you know, these guys are out, like, their lifestyle's better than our lifestyle internally, Um, so I actually took a huge risk, and I went to Doug at the time and I said, listen, I said, I want to own a bigger piece of this thing. And I think the way to do it is to actually be a master franchisee. Um, and the only territory that was left that made sense to me was the Caribbean. And we had never gone international before as a company. Everything was really primarily US, Canada, Hawaii. And, he looked at me and he's like, if you stay, you write your own ticket for as long as you want at Cold Stone. He goes, if you go, it's still a huge win because we get probably the best partner we could ever have now, who built the brand, who's got his fingerprints all over this thing, who put us on the map and, has been driving this, taking it internationally. And literally within about 72 hours, I raised $2 million, bought the rights, and we picked up my wife at the time. Her and I just looked at each other, and she's still my wife, I should say. But we looked at each other, and it's like, let's do this. Like, we're in our 20s, living in the Caribbean. Most people want to retire down there, and we get to bring the best ice cream concept ever to the Caribbean. Like,
So you were still in your 20s at this point.
yeah,
I
yeah,
feel like you're indefinitely. We still haven't gotten to 30 here. You're like giving us life stories.
yeah. It has been a journey, right? And
So, how many years were you the head of marketing at Cold Stone?
so total of 4 years, 4.5 years, we did all of that. I mean, it was fast and furious, and we did something. I mean, no one else had ever done that, and today even Cold Stone is one of those benchmarks in the certainly the franchise industry, in the ice cream industry. I mean, there isn't a month that goes by, even today, where someone doesn't reach out and, hey, can I, how did you guys grow Cold Stone? We're doing ice cream, or we're thinking about franchising. So we left a huge mark on that industry because of not only how fast we grew, but how well we did it throughout that time too. Um,
So, how did you do as a master franchiser for the Caribbean?
Great. We went down there. We brought ice cream to the Caribbean. I mean, cruise ships, great weather, and opened up locations throughout the islands. And then, within about a 2-year period, we had twin girls, and realized, like, it's running the business and having kids on the island and everything. We need to move back to the mainland. And my wife grew up in Vancouver, BC. I grew up in the States, and it was kind of like, do we move back to Arizona? We actually ended up choosing Parkland, Florida, because we could still operate Cold Stone in the Caribbean, but live in the mainland US. And then we started developing in Florida too. So it gave us the opportunity to develop more locations throughout Florida. And then we ended up selling the territory back to the company, which
How does
was
that work? So, if you hold the franchise rights and you sell it back to the company, do you, is it like selling any other business, just a multiple on earnings, or are you doing a special sweetheart deal?
no, I mean, there's obviously, because of the relationship, there were other things at play, but at the end of the day, it's like any other business deal. I mean, with franchising, it's interesting because you're buying royalty stream too, like forward royalties, because there's agreements in place for, up to 10 years for the locations. There's royalty being generated, and that's forecasted out. So there's interesting formula on, you're buying into this future royalty plus the future opportunity to open more locations, if the market's not saturated.
And why did you decide to sell instead of just hold it?
Yeah, we at the time we because I was one of the original partners, built the company, on the inside. That's when Cold Stone Creamery was selling to a much larger company. And at that time, it was kind of like, okay, you could decide, do you stay along with that, go through that change, and who knows what could happen, or do you get out while the timing is probably really good. And that was one where the timing was really good for us to exit out of that, get out of the ice cream industry for the most part, and then sort of reset and figure out what we wanted to do next.
All right. Well, let's talk Little Kitchen Academy. So, what you're doing right now is really innovative, really cool. I love it. Why don't you give us the 30 seconds on LKA?
Yeah, yeah, and I just there was one stop between that, which I think is important. So after Cold Stone, I was a partner in Raving Brands, and we were the number one fast casual restaurant group in all of North America. We had, Moe's Southwest Grill, Shane's Rib Shack, Doc Green's, Monkey Joe's, Flying Biscuit. We had 9 different concepts, 2,200 locations globally, almost all franchised. Um,
Were you a founder there, or you joined that also afterwards?
I joined that. I had some of my old partners from Cold Stone were partners there, and said, "You need to come up to this." And it took a year because I'm like, "Now I'm good." It was in Atlanta, based out of Atlanta, Georgia, and they finally brought me up and they said, just come and see what we're doing. And I walked into Moe's, Southwest Grill, and I'm like, and it was the Cold Stone moment. I'm like, holy shit, guys. Like, this is insane. Like, they're like, but we need you. Like, we need someone who can brand and market this thing and really accelerate it. And I'm like, I bought a house that day, didn't tell my wife. I flew back down. I said, we're moving. We moved and, built that up. And then Moe's, we ended up selling to Focus Brands, for like 150 million cash. It was one of the biggest, 11 multiple, one of the biggest deals in franchising at that time. And, and that's when, I exited and, my wife and I moved, back to Vancouver where she's from. Um, and I started Flip Flop Shops, which is my company. And Flip Flop Shops, we grew that to be the number one retailer of flip flop sandals, casual footwear, globally. Partnerships with Birkenstock, Bob Hurley, Quicksilver, Reef, you name it, things that no one's ever done before. Created a category that didn't exist ever, and introduced it to the world. Exited that. I sold it to Cherokee,
Are
which
you
is,
just attracted? So, like, we went from
yeah,
restaurants to flip flops just now. Are you just someone who sees holes in the market and says, I can fill it? Is it about personal needs? Or do you approach it more as a businessman and say, here's demand, here's supply. Let me see what the economics look like.
yeah. My approach has always been, Um, I love it, and everyone else needs to love it and needs to see it. And people just they don't see it. They need to hear about this more. And if they do, this will be a massive, massive success. So Cold Stone, it was I tasted the ice cream and saw it. I'm like, this is great, but it could be so much better. With the restaurant group, it was, oh my gosh, this is awesome, but we can tighten up the brand, we can elevate, we can market it better, bring in strategic partnerships and do all these things that no one else has ever done and blow it up, which we did. And again, a lot of firsts in the industry with the restaurants. And then with Flip Flop Shops, it was one where, I grew up surfing, skating, being on the lake, boating, like anything on wheels, and loved wearing flip flops and loved those brands that I grew up around, and then just saw this opportunity to have something that was essentially the Sunglass Hut for flip-flops. It was literally, I mean, I modeled it after Sunglass Hut. I mean, to a T, every single thing we did, it was like, oh, same footprint, same type of location, same, it's like, let's go. And, I mean, we ended up being, 5-time Inc. 500, fastest growing company. We were the hottest concept in, the International Council of Shopping Centers.
How big did it get? Like, how many locations? What kind of what?
Yeah, at our peak, before I sold it to Cherokee and we exited, with my partners, we were at 236 locations globally, and we were in the Middle East, South Africa, Asia, Canada, U.S., Guam, Hawaii, all over.
And what year was that in?
That was in 2007 is when we started it. And we sold in 2015 to Cherokee, which is one of the largest licensors in the world, license companies. Tony Hawk, was one of the biggest brands that we had there. And then I ran that for 2 years as a publicly traded company. And then finally did the full, founder CEO exit now. Um,
It took a few
and
tries, but you got there.
I finally got out. Yeah. I tried to get out. And then finally it was like, okay, got out.
Okay, so tell us about Little Kitchen Academy.
Yeah, so I was getting ready actually to start a footwear brand, and it was going to be the first of its kind footwear brand, ready to go. And during that time, my wife Felicity, who's got amazing restaurant background, she was with Earl's Restaurants, which is a really big Canadian chain, and now in the U.S. Brought it to the U.S. First ever Earl's in the U.S. She brought down, and that's how we met. So she's got this great culinary background, Red Seal chef training. She grew up in a very educational background. Her dad started one of the most prominent private schools in Canada, here in Vancouver. And then our youngest daughter experienced Montessori. And when Felicity saw that, she lost her mind and she's like, I need to know everything about it. Became and got her essentially a master's in Montessori teaching. And during this time, she kept talking about this idea of, wanting to open a bakery or something that taught kids, how to eat healthier. And we just kept talking about it, talking about it. I was busy with, getting ready to launch, what was going to become, one of the biggest footwear brands ever. And 2 weeks before we were getting ready to really pull the trigger on it, um, she just looked at me and I looked at her and our girls looked at each other and they're like, why don't you and mom do this Little Kitchen Academy together? And we didn't have a name yet. One of my twin daughters came up with the name. She said Little Kitchen Academy. And we're like, what? She's like, well, the idea you're talking about. We're like, oh my gosh. Like, and right away I'm like, boom, bought the URL. And we're like, yeah, why don't we do this? And we were going to open just one here in Vancouver as sort of a passion project for her, and I was going to be part of it and tinker with it essentially. And one of my good friends, David Kahn, who's the CEO of Birkenstock, who we grew, Birkenstock and flip flop shops together, and share the same brain in how we build brands and companies and teams and cultures. I called him and I said, the footwear thing I wanted to do? He's like, yeah. I said, I think I'm going to shelve it for a while because what do you think of this idea? And he literally said, we're going to be your global brand partner. I'm like, who? He goes, Birkenstock. I'm like, Birkenstock?
What was the one sentence pitch you gave him when you explained LKA back 5 years ago?
Yeah, it's the same thing now. I said, we are going to be the leading, Montessori inspired cooking academy for kids. And we're going to teach kids, you know, practical life skills, food literacy in a safe, empowering environment. And the way we're going to do it is through knowledge, is get out of the way. Let them be the most beautiful human beings they can be in an environment that's conducive to that. And, he just went, this is needed. I mean, youth enrichment, health, wellness, nutrition, the Montessori thing, kids. He's like the obesity rates, the things that are going on, in the world. Like it's an unhealthy society. The Surgeon General came out not too long ago saying it's the first generation that may not outlive their parents as far as their age range goes because of the health. And he's like, you guys could do something about it. He's like, we're in. And I'm like, why would Birkenstock be in, Dave? And he's like, we make the number one culinary shoe in the world. It's $100 million category that no one even knows about. He goes, you guys are the platform. And I'm like, and he goes, give me a couple hours. And he called back. He goes, I talked to the family, the Birkenstock family. He goes, yeah. He's like, what do you need? He goes, we'll build a Birkenstock wall inside your environment. We'll give you the product. We'll do things that Birkenstock has never done in its 250-year history because what you're going to give us is better than a Super Bowl ad. Ages 3 to 18, 3-hour classes, learning about healthier ways to eat, healthier relationships with food, becoming independent, understanding what's going in their body, having fun, being fed. He's like, wearing our Birkenstocks? Like, what do you need? And that's really where it was like, oh yeah, this is bigger and we actually need to build a brand, to build a company, to raise money and go after this because we're 5 minutes ahead of where we believed someone else may be.
So are most of the businesses, I'm just thinking back now to the beginning, obviously you IPO'd the first one. Is your style typically to raise investor money or are you more of a bootstrapper?
No, it's so bootstrapper early on, and then it's always been one round and done. With anything we've ever done. I mean, Flip Flop Shops was the most recent where it was a one round, friends, family, no debt, build the thing up, big exit for everybody. So everyone was really happy. And with Little Kitchen Academy, we did a friends and family round. We actually, oversubscribed. It was very quick. I mean, we ended up raising, a total, in our first, round with everybody. We did sort of an initial seed round and then we did a top up round, during COVID because of course, pandemic, it was like, we didn't know if things were going to continue or not. But we ended up oversubscribing by over 200% on our round through our
And why
network.
did you even need money? I mean, at that point, you already had a couple exits. You could have probably funded this yourself. Why did you raise a friends and family round?
Yeah, and we did. We funded the first location ourselves. When we did that, but it was what I've learned along the way is that we have a very strong orbit of people. It's when you look at our advisory board we have, when you look at our investor group, the global brands that are part of Little Kitchen now, the things we're doing. Most people, as they peel the layer back, they literally have that. Are you kidding me? Like, Russell Westbrook, LA Clippers, one of the most philanthropic athletes on the planet. Shep Gordon, the supermensch, who created the celebrity chef. Managed Alice Cooper for 50 plus years. Has a documentary. For him, like the CEO of Birkenstock and these partners. So what we realize is that when you bring these people into it, it's a lot more fun to share it. You get a lot more out of everybody when you're not greedy, and it's not about, retain as much as you can and have as much ownership. It's we know how to grow faster, more efficiently, more impactfully than anybody else on the planet. And I truly believe that. And, we can back it up with, you look at these concepts, every one of them was, number one in their category, globally scaled, still standing today. Not a lot of people have done that before. And with Little Kitchen Academy, I looked at that where if we were going to bootstrap it, we wouldn't be talking right now. I firmly believe that it would have been, through pandemic and everything. I think it would have been a rough go. Having these global brand partnerships and bringing in the friends and family that have been with us since as early as the Cold Stone Creamery days, with us on every one of these deals has proven to be a formula that works.
Do you find, because these are obviously unrelated, I mean, cigars to ice cream to shoes to cooking schools, are
Yeah.
there through lines and lessons that you take and say, okay, I know how to do this because of that? Or are you having to learn new things all the time?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great part about being an entrepreneur. I think a true entrepreneur is that every day is a new lesson. It's like going to school again. So every industry is different, but the formula, the foundation, and the core of who we are, and how I know how to build things specifically with the culture of the team, and do it efficiently too. We do bootstrap in the sense of like at flip flop shops, we never had a headquarter office ever. We only had 6 people at our max, and we built that company to be a global company.
Six people at the HQ and then you franchise the rest. Is that what you mean?
We franchise corporately owned and everything, but it's we've mastered the third party, right, and bringing people into what we do and doing it the right way. So bringing partnerships in that no one else could get, that can accelerate your growth, build the value, get you doors opening that would never open for you before, on it. And part of it is just you've got to have something that's really special. And with Little Kitchen Academy, I mean, it is as much fun as other things were the first that we did. This is impact. I mean, we are, 100,000 student visits so far. We're turning 5 in June. We're only 5 years old as a company. 2.5 years of pandemic COVID and trying to figure out, how things are going to look out there like everybody else. But the impact we've had and the attention that we've gotten and, where we're headed, it's people's head spin. I mean, we have, relationships with brands that people would pay huge money for, would beg for, and we're getting it because of not only who we are and the way we approach things very fairly and not being greedy, but also this impact is important to people in the world right now. It's
Yeah,
important
it's
to the.
it's a social mission as much as it is a profit motive.
Yeah, I mean, IKEA, Whole Foods, Russell Westbrook, these things that are happening that are in our orbit, they don't happen to anyone else out there. And it's not because, wow, we're so great. It's just that we're so passionate. We know how to build a company and a brand more importantly. And that's something I think that, I'm confident that we do better than anyone else is we know how to build a brand that can scale globally, transcend languages, cultures, geographies, and do it in a time frame that honestly no one else can do.
Well, it's a really cool concept, and your background tells me that this is going to be really, really big. It already is getting very big, and it's exciting. It's exciting to watch. Brian, this is awesome. Where can people learn more?
Yeah, they can visit littlekitchenacademy.com. We've got schools now across Canada, the US. We're getting ready to really hit the ground with, we're doing a Series A funding round right now. And people have come to us wanting to take us public.
60-day public.
Yeah, right. We're getting ready to expand globally and really share this with more people. So, our website and then our social media is a great way to get a peek, to any of our Instagrams and things like that. If you look at what's happening out there, it's pretty special.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing it here.
Yeah, John, really appreciate it, man.